So just to introduce myself, my name's Emily Jobson. I work for Chevron full-time. I'm also a full-time master's student through Royal Roads University. As you can imagine, I don't sleep. So part of the reason that I chose this topic for my thesis is because it kind of aligns with what I do currently, and I think it's a gap in research for industry with the direction we're going. Increasing freshwater use in hydraulic fracturing, increasing awareness by the public, and increasing concern on water use, especially in shale gas hydraulic fracturing where we're using high volumes of water. So before I kind of move on from this title slide, the first thing I want to discuss is the word perceptions. And one of the points I want to make is that perceptions, especially in the general public, are often not based on fact. And what you need to remember with that is that one person's reality that's what they're going to base their perceptions on. It doesn't matter if it's not based on scientific fact, it's based on what information they're getting from the people that they're talking to. And then just the other thing that you want to remember is those perceptions feed into what we sometimes call in industry the social license to operate. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the term social license to operate. And we're seeing more and more that social license to operate feeds into decisions that regulatory agencies are making, and you see that clearly with Keystone and Northern Gateway pipelines. What people are saying and what society wants from industry will frame what the regulatory agencies are going to decide. In my opinion, one of the biggest mistakes, or one of the mistakes that industry can make when it comes to social license to operate, is assuming that if we're re-entering an already developed area, that we have an existing social license to operate and we don't need to enhance or improve on the social license to operate that we currently have. I looked specifically at the Fox Creek and Whitecourt area because that isn't an already developed area, and we're kind of re-entering it with the Duvernay development. So just kind of assessing what people think there and then what direction public perceptions are going to go in that region. Quick overview of what the project's about. You can see there the red star is in the general Kaybob area of the Duvernay. And then the research starts with a literature review, interviews, and then a survey based on the responses from the interview, or the interviews. The interviews and surveys were conducted in Fox Creek and Whitecourt. The primary reason I chose the two areas is because I wanted to, one of the questions I was asking when I started the research was, does proximity to hydraulic fracturing activity change perceptions, positive or negative? Whitecourt still is primarily a forestry town, whereas Fox Creek is an oil and gas town. It was essentially built by the oil and gas industry. So are there a difference in opinions between the two towns? And just for those of you that are researchers, it's mixed methods research, both qualitative and quantitative information, using triangulation to provide validity to the research. So public opinion. This is kind of where my literature review started. Just looking at Canada broadly, in 2011 there was a Canadian public opinion poll, and what they found was that 75% of Canadians would support increased oil and gas development as long as environmental issues were addressed and reduced. In that same poll, they found that people had a strong preference for oil and gas companies to essentially regulate themselves and be transparent operators versus increasing regulations by the regulatory bodies in the different provinces and federal regulations. The next area I looked at in my literature review was the Barnett Shale. So there's been a ton of research by a researcher named Gene Theodori in the area. He looked at, he compared the differences between, similar to the research I'm doing, but between more mature shale and less mature shale. And he did sort of a qualitative assessment on what the socio-environmental perceptions are in that area. He identified 30 socio-environmental issues that people had concerns with. Numbers 2, 4, and 6 in that area, sorry I don't know it off the top of my head, 2, 4, and 6 were freshwater use, aquifer depletion, and water contamination. Number 1 was increased truck traffic. And then with increased truck traffic, there are going to be noise issues, dust issues, all that kind of stuff. But for the water focus, freshwater use, aquifer depletion, and water contamination. The next one I looked at was New Brunswick, where there's a moratorium essentially on right now. And the way New Brunswick is structuring addressing the shale gas issue is they're inviting a lot of public debate and public opinion. So similar studies going on in that region, and the key issues identified are water sourcing, chemical use, and groundwater contamination. Interestingly, in that area, studies are showing that public concerns about environmental protection outweigh the potential for economic benefit. So even though shale gas development in that area would provide gigantic economic benefit in that area, people are against oil and gas development if it's going to impact the environment in that area. The third one I looked at was in Northeast BC, specifically the Horn River, but the kind of the general area. BC Ministry of Health initiated an assessment on the risks of shale gas development, and as part of identifying the risks to assess, they invited the public to send in letters, come talk to the Ministry of Health, let them know what issues the public had with increased development. And the concerns mentioned in the report include contamination of domestic and municipal groundwater wells, general water scarcity and water quality, and cumulative impacts to the watershed and watershed ecosystem. That's interesting to me because a lot of the other areas, it was more localized impacts, whereas in Northeast BC, people are more concerned about regional cumulative impacts. So using all this information that I got from the literature review, I went to Fox Creek and Whitecourt and did a number of semi-structured interviews. So I did have a set of specific questions, but they were kind of free flow if people had more things that they wanted to talk about. Lots of time to chat. It was informal, coffee shop kind of interviews. So on this slide, you can kind of see the primary topics that people discussed. When we're talking about competitive water use, this relates to use of municipal water for hydraulic fracturing. One thing that came up specifically in Fox Creek, and I'm not sure if everyone's aware of this, but there is a bylaw in Fox Creek that that basically says that you are not allowed to use the municipal water from the town for hydraulic fracturing or drilling activities, only for camps. And I know that some companies might not realize that. So that was one thing that kept coming up there. Also, and this is where it comes back to the issue of public perceptions, but people kept saying the level in our lakes is going down. And I'm not sure, I haven't taken a look at the data, but for instance, Smoke Lake in that area had local fishermen and hunters and all that come up to me and say, Smoke Lake's gone down by 2 meters in the past 10 years. Anecdotal, obviously, but that's what their perception is that oil and gas water use is drawing down the local recreational lakes. Talking about economic development and support, the tax structure in Alberta is structured in a way that it doesn't necessarily support smaller towns such as Fox Creek. Fox Creek, the issue with Fox Creek, they're kind of seeing like a boom town. I know you've heard of, or I'm sure most of you have heard of boom town issues. So what's going on in Fox Creek is that they have a shadow population that comes into the town. They have camps just outside of town. They're using the resources in the town. The town's paying for road upgrades, repairing, truckway and all that kind of stuff. But the people that are coming in to use the resources aren't paying taxes to the community. So the town is paying out to support the shadow population in the area, whereas they're not bringing in a lot of money. The other issue in Fox Creek relates to municipal water use, needing new sources, not having the money either in the municipality or from the provincial government to upgrade their water systems. Whitecourt, as a larger community, is more able to support high development. They have the money to put into building new hotels, supporting the industry that's coming into the area. In 2012, Whitecourt sold $400 million worth of industrial property to oil and gas, whereas Fox Creek no longer has any land to sell. So they're struggling. Flowback reuse and use of saline was another hot topic in the interviews. Participants focused on flowback reuse. Lack of knowledge primarily relates to the want and need for industry to tell them what's going on. They get a lot of third-hand knowledge, but they're not getting information directly from the companies that are operating in the area. Groundwater contamination I'll go into a little bit more when I talk about the survey results, but in general, people are a little more concerned about actual hydraulic fracturing, whereas they're not quite as concerned about how we're disposing of the flowback. So disposal wells, they're not as concerned about that. So using the information I got from the interviews, as well as the literature review, I put together an online survey, went out to Fox Creek and Whitecourt and hand-delivered 1,360 invitation letters. The survey consisted of demographic questions such as location, gender, age, and then 9 focused questions based on the interview and literature review results. There were an equal number of responses from Fox Creek and Whitecourt. And the other interesting thing about the survey, or maybe not so interesting thing, or maybe expected thing, is it was a very low response rate. And one thing I wanted to mention about the response rate, which I'll say up front, was 3.2%. What that might mean, it could mean the low response rate could be due to a number of things. It could be survey design, could be the amount of time the survey was online, which was 2 weeks, inability to do in-person follow-up with the people that we distributed the survey invitation letters to, or it could be that 97% of the people in the area haven't formed an opinion one way or another yet. So this is where I think industry has a giant opportunity. If 97% of people haven't formed an opinion, they still have an opinion to form. And depending on who gets there to provide them with their information is the way that they're going to end up going. So just looking at what the survey results were, the first question here is, overall I feel that water sourcing for hydraulic fracturing is being done responsibly. About half of the respondents felt that sourcing wasn't being done properly. Another 32% were kind of on the fence about it, and then a small percentage agreed that sourcing was being done responsibly. The key perceptions related to this one in the survey were, again, lack of flowback reuse, drawdown of recreational lakes, themes that we're seeing across the research. And then there were a couple of people that made comments about water trucks pulling water out of the creeks without permits and without using fish screens. So just in general, seeing water trucks pulling water out of the creeks. And again, that comes down to perceptions. The statement here, I believe there is enough water for all users. And similar to the first one, people generally don't think, people generally don't think there's enough water for all users. I left this ambiguous on purpose. I didn't define spatial or temporal boundaries to this. It's a moment in time, how people are feeling right now, and this might be a good follow-up question for a number of years down the road, kind of once industry has gone into the area, depending on how community relations is handled, to see how people feel about the amount of water availability in that area at that time. The question here, I believe the oil and gas industry is disposing of flowback appropriately. Like I said, for the most part, people believe that it's being disposed of responsibly. However, in this slide, you can see that 91% of people feel that the oil and gas industry should be required to recycle a portion of their flowback. When I was talking about my literature review, I mentioned that on the eastern side of Canada, people were wanting corporate transparency versus increasing government regulation. The use of the word required to recycle a portion of the flowback in this kind of says to me, and possibly to other people, that residents in the area feel like industry is not doing enough on their own, and perhaps it's time for the regulators to step in and require it. Groundwater contamination. This is just looking at groundwater contamination due to actual hydraulic fracturing versus flowback disposal. Again, slightly less concern about the use of downhole disposal wells, but there is certainly concern with groundwater contamination due to actual hydraulic fracturing activities. And again, I just remind you that this is based on perceptions, but not fact, because they don't generally get hard data or hard facts in that area. Community relations, support versus information. In general, we're seeing that people see that industry is doing a good job of supporting the communities they operate in. So you have companies supporting hockey teams and giving money to charities and stuff like that. But people are feeling that they're not getting enough information from the companies directly. And this is where their perceptions might be a little bit negative of the industry just because they don't have the information. So next steps for industry, I kind of touched on two key words, perceptions and opportunity. Like I said, that there are a huge number of people in that area that want information, that are lacking information, and that still are kind of neutral or on the fence about what's going on in their area. So industry needs to provide those people with factual information. One of the things you need to remember is that people in that area are going to be doing primarily internet searches as how they're getting their information. If they're slightly on the negative side of how they view industry, their search terms are going to be something like safety issues in hydraulic fracturing, whereas if they're slightly positive to industry in the area, their search term is going to be something like safe hydraulic fracturing practices. And then based on those search terms, that's the kind of information they're going to get, which is going to frame their perceptions, and it kind of snowballs from there. And then perceptions, again, just trying to frame the direction that people go in that area by providing them with the information that they need. Next steps for me, finishing this all up, providing the report to PTAC, and then providing PTAC and industry with recommendations on how to go forward with community relations in an increasingly developed area for shale gas.